So the PC version of Rebirth is here, and over the past 10 days, Square Enix have provided me the opportunity to play through the game and experience what the PC version has to offer. And I need to preface this by saying, I want to eat every last pixel. Good lord. I said this in my review for Rebirth last year when it came out, but this is just hands down one of the most gorgeous looking games that Square Enix have ever developed, and quite impressive considering it is UE4. A lot of people were a little bit confused there, thinking this might be UE5, considering that they're currently developing Kingdom Hearts 4 under UE5, but no, this is in fact UE4. Though, of course, when Rebirth launched on the base PlayStation 5, there were some visual issues there, and this was most notably the clarity of picture when running the game in performance mode, which is what most people opted for. It would pretty much set the dynamic resolution scaling to anywhere from 1080p to 1440p to maintain 60 frames per second. Now, this was slightly alleviated with a patch that was applied shortly after the release of the game, though it still persisted. And then, of course, the PS5 Pro launched, and Rebirth was one of the very first games to receive a Pro patch, allowing players to play with the fidelity mode clarity, but also run at 60 frames per second. It's a night and day difference when you look at the performance mode on the base PS5 to what the Pro is capable of, and is definitely one of the best examples of a Pro patch done right. However, for a game this gorgeous, I think a lot of people have been waiting for the PC release to either experience or at the very least see what Rebirth would look like at true native 4K and absolutely everything cranked up, so that we can finally see the intended vision of what Rebirth is truly meant to look like. Don't get me wrong, the experience on even the base PS5 and obviously the Pro is good enough, especially the Pro. It's actually quite impressive. The use of PlayStation's new upsampling technology shines really bright, but the PC version is going to give us full control over both visuals and performance, increased levels of detail for textures off in the distance, which is important considering this is an open world game, double the frame rate, bumping it all the way up to 120 frames per second through DLSS and variable refresh rates, and even an overhauled lighting system that is exclusive to the PC version. And it's pretty important because the lighting was one of the other complaints about Rebirth's visuals, with how it could make some of the environments and even character models appear visually odd. So this is actually something that Square Enix went in and further improved. So looking over at the settings menu here, there is no full screen option. You've either got borderless or windowed. A lot of games are opting for this now, completely ditching out full screen and just simply opting for borderless. And for games like this, rather than setting a resolution, we have dynamic resolution scaling. DRS has been incredibly common for a long time now. This is basically the upscaling technique that both PC and even console games use. For my experience of Rebirth, I opted for a maximum of 100 and a minimum of 50. Now, this means that I'm not technically playing at true native 4K, and the reason behind this is to achieve 100 to 120 frames per second. For display sync technology, we have either VRR, variable refresh rate, or of course VSync. I played with all of the graphics options set to the absolute highest, aside from texture resolution and background model detail. For anti-aliasing, we have three options: TAA, TAAU, or DLSS. Obviously, if you are using a NVIDIA card, DLSS is the way to go. And you even have settings for characters displayed in the environment, along with the shadow display distance for character models. A quick note here, let's say I have characters displayed at 5, that doesn't mean that only 5 characters can appear on screen at once. This is simply the level of scaling towards how many characters can be or will be displayed on your screen. Now, I should explain that I ran this on 2 different setups technically. Really, it only comes down to the CPU being changed out halfway through my experience of playing on the PC version, but at first, I was using a 4070 Ti along with a Ryzen 9 5900X. Partway through, I then built a new PC, and the biggest change here was my CPU, changing it to a Ryzen 9 9950X. My GPU still remained the same, so everything that you guys are seeing right now for the footage is running via a 4070 Ti. I thought this would be interesting to show you that even on a mid-range card, you can play Rebirth anywhere from 100 to 120 frames with almost all of the settings absolutely maxed. Of course, everyone's experience is going to vary here depending on what your rig looks like. If I were to crank all of these settings up to absolute max, and most importantly the minimum for DRS, setting that to 100%, then I'm going to get anywhere from 50 to 60 frames per second. But I have to tell you that Rebirth running at 120 frames per second is simply glorious, and even with a couple of the settings toned back, the game still looks insanely beautiful. Rebirth with everything set to the absolute lowest possible, though still keeping the resolution max at 100 and the resolution minimum at 50 with DLSS on, I mean, the game still looks simply incredible. So for people that are playing on hardware that is below what I am playing on here, I don't think you should really have any issues with playing Rebirth. I know a lot of people are worried, like, oh, I don't think my rig's going to be able to handle it, or my rig's going to blow up. So long as you've got the DLSS on, the game should look absolutely fine. And keeping in mind too, you can always play around with the dynamic resolution scale to boost performance even furthermore. Obviously, if we're looking at cards beyond the 4070 Ti, like the 4080, the 4090, or looking at the upcoming 50 series, either being 5070 Ti or 5080, 5090, I mean, you'll have no worries at all. You're going to have a super crispy, super smooth experience. The brand new lighting for the PC version was definitely a bit of a topic of conversation when they dropped the comparison images between PS5 to PC when they revealed the PC version, because in some cases with this new lighting, the game almost looks like a remaster of sort, and considering this was one of the big complaints, it's a pretty exciting aspect. And yeah, absolutely, the lighting has been improved, but I don't think it's like drastic. It is certainly noticeable, and it's more so noticeable in cutscenes. But like, unless you have the PlayStation 5 version sitting right next to the PC version, you're not going to notice straight off the bat. For average non-Final Fantasy VII enthusiasts, like, they won't pick up on this at all. But for people who care about visuals and that are right into this type of thing, then yes, it's absolutely noticeable. Those odd moments where the lighting would make some of the character models look really strange, like this for instance, Cloud looks like he's been up for 4 days deep, no sleep. But over here on the PC version, you can see it looks a lot better. So it is evident that Square Enix have gone in and further improved this. I don't want to say that the lighting is totally like 100% changed, because there are some situations sometimes where depending on where you are in the world and what environment you're in, the lighting can be a little bit overexposed, and this is something that I was hoping Square Enix would try to tone down a little bit, but unfortunately that is still present. That being said, when the lighting is working the way it should, it looks simply gorgeous here on PC with the upped clarity when it comes to visuals. Like here in this footage, I'm outside the Haunted House Hotel in Gold Saucer. There's a bunch of different colored light sources going on. Considering that Rebirth doesn't use something like RTX, it's pretty impressive what's being pulled off here. Now, switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about the negatives and the issues that I stumbled across from my time with the PC version, from what I experienced on my hardware. Don't worry, I don't have too many. I think Square Enix have done a really good job here. But the biggest issue that I have is absolutely the pop-in. This was a problem on the PlayStation 5 version, and it's still a problem here on PC. Now, this is only noticeable when you're out in the open world regions. Obviously, the linear segments of Rebirth, you're not really going to notice any pop-in happening, but out in the open world, as you're progressing down a path, you'll notice all of the foliage, the bushes, the rocks on the ground, popping in from their low poly to their high poly versions. And again, this was something that was present on PS5. It is something that you adjust to as you play the game, and after a while you just don't really end up noticing it, but it is quite obvious if you're looking out for it. And to be honest, I think that Rebirth is one of the most obvious cases of pop-in happening that I've personally experienced from an open world game. Now here's the thing about pop-in when it comes to open world video games. It is generally caused from a lack of VRAM. Keeping in mind once again that I am running on a 4070 Ti that only has 12 gigs of VRAM. Now SSD speeds can also affect pop-in as well, but because I'm using a 990 Evo Plus, yeah, I don't think that's the issue. I think this is a VRAM problem. And considering that Square Enix recommends 16 gigs of VRAM or more for the Ultra preset, yeah, it's likely my 12 gigs here struggling to load everything in, so just be mindful of that. As I said, you'll probably forget about this after some time of playing the game, but at first, when you notice it, it will take a little while before you unnotice it. Now looking at the big one here, crashes. I know a lot of people are curious to know how stable and how optimized is Rebirth. Well, I'm happy to report it's actually incredibly stable, because I only crashed once over my almost 30 hours of playing the PC version. This is an absolute record for crashes even before a game's release on PC for a Square Enix PC port, man. They did a phenomenal job. And it's also important to know that this crash happened before the patch that was applied to the game about 4 days after I received it. The last negative, I promise you, and it's a pretty small one and honestly to be expected issue, but DLSS ghosting. I'm not 100% on what version of DLSS this is, but I have to assume it's most likely 3. As we know, DLSS 4 is upon us, but this game will not use that. Ghosting is here, and again, to be expected for games that are currently using DLSS, though it's not super consistent or anything. I've just had a few situations where I've noticed it, like within the menus, or if I'm swinging from a rope. The rope ghosting will be very obvious, but aside from that, the ghosting is actually pretty good here. It's just, I should let you know, it is a thing that you might notice. Again, to be expected. DLSS 4 is going to have, minimum ghosting, and if there was perhaps a future update that applied DLSS 4, then perhaps this issue would be alleviated. But just expect that there will be very small amounts of this. So overall, I'm incredibly impressed by the PC port of Rebirth. I do think this is one of the better PC ports that have come out of Square Enix, as they have a little bit of a track record for making not the greatest optimized PC ports of their games, and especially if we are stacking it up against some of the issues that Kingdom Hearts faced along with Final Fantasy XVI, Rebirth is looking pretty good here. I think for anyone that is currently concerned about their rig being able to handle this game or not, I think you might be surprised. The game seems fairly optimized, and so long as you're using DLSS, you should have some pretty good results. Keep in mind that the specs of the Steam Deck can fully handle Rebirth. It is completely optimized by Square Enix to run Rebirth on the system. And by the way, if you are curious to know how Rebirth performs on Steam Deck, there will be a video out on the channel very soon talking about that. And there are currently rumors floating around that Square Enix also plan on releasing Rebirth onto Switch 2 in 2026. So who knows, maybe your rig that might be a few years old at this point, that may even still be using the 20 series, could potentially end up running Rebirth with some pretty surprising results. The other thing to look forward to about this game coming to PC is obviously the mod support. There's already a ton of mods currently right now for Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I simply can't wait to see what the community end up putting together when it comes to Rebirth. I think the potential is a little bit higher considering this is an open world game. Thank you so much Square Enix for supplying me with early access to the PC version, and well done! Your game that was already drop dead gorgeous is wow. I'm suddenly a big fan of video game cliff textures. Thank you so much for tuning in. Slap that like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything going on here. Big shout out to my wonderful patrons. I hope all of you guys are having a fantastic day, and we'll talk again real soon.